I remember the exact moment my heart shattered into a million pieces. It was the 12th of February, 2 days before Valentine's Day, and I was standing in our bedroom doorway with a bottle of champagne in one hand and a small velvet box in the other. Inside that box was a vintage watch I had spent 6 months tracking down because Daniel had mentioned it once, just once, 3 years ago on our second date. He had pointed at a magazine advertisement and said his grandfather used to wear one just like it. I remembered. I always remembered everything about him because that is what you do when you love someone with your entire soul. But as I stood there, frozen, the champagne warming in my grip, I watched my husband of 4 years type a message on his phone with a smile I had not seen directed at me in months. That smile, soft and secretive and full of anticipation, was meant for someone else. I did not know it yet, but that smile was the beginning of the end of everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the man I had built my entire future around. My name is Emma, and I need to tell you this story from the very beginning so you can understand how I went from being a woman planning the most romantic Valentine's Day surprise to becoming someone who methodically dismantled her husband's carefully constructed world of lies. This is not a story about violence or hatred. This is a story about what happens when trust is broken so completely that the only way forward is through the wreckage. This is a story about karma, about consequences, and about finding strength in the ashes of betrayal. Daniel and I met at a mutual friend's birthday party in Shoreditch. I was 25, freshly promoted to junior marketing manager at a boutique agency, and absolutely convinced I was too focused on my career to fall in love. He was 28, confident without being arrogant, and he had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. When he laughed, his whole face transformed, and when he listened, really listened, you could see him absorbing every word you said. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours. We talked about everything and nothing, from our favorite childhood memories to our biggest fears. He told me about losing his mother to cancer when he was 17, about how his father had become a ghost in their home after that, about how he had promised himself he would never let the people he loved feel invisible. I should have paid more attention to the way he said those words, to the slight hesitation before the word promise. But I was already falling. Our courtship was the kind of romance novels are written about. Long walks along the Thames, spontaneous weekend trips to the Cotswolds, handwritten notes hidden in my jacket pockets. Daniel was thoughtful in ways that made my friends jealous and my mother tearful with hope. After 18 months, he proposed in Paris on a bridge overlooking the Seine, with the Eiffel Tower glittering behind us like something out of a dream. I said yes before he could finish the question. We were married 6 months later in a small ceremony in Kent, surrounded by the people we loved most. I remember looking at him across the altar and thinking that I had finally found my person, my forever. I had no idea that forever would last exactly 4 years, 2 months, and 17 days. The first 3 years of our marriage were happy. At least, I believed they were. We bought a small Victorian terrace house in Clapham, spent our weekends renovating it room by room, argued about paint colors, and laughed when we got them completely wrong. Daniel was climbing the corporate ladder at his financial consulting firm, working long hours but always making time for date nights on Fridays. I was promoted twice at my agency, eventually becoming senior marketing manager for our biggest accounts. We talked about having children one day, about maybe getting a dog first to practice the responsibility. We had a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a vision of our future that we had built together brick by brick. I loved that vision. I loved him. But looking back now, I can see the cracks that I refused to acknowledge at the time. The phone calls he would take in another room, the way his gym sessions started lasting longer and longer, the subtle distance that crept into our conversations, the way he would sometimes look at me like he was already somewhere else. I told myself it was work stress. His firm was going through a major restructuring, and he was up for a senior partner position that would change everything for us financially. He was distracted because he was focused. He was distant because he was exhausted. I made excuses for him, because that is what you do when you love someone. You fill in the gaps with hope. It was Sophie who first planted the seed of doubt. Sophie had been my best friend since we were 11 years old, partners in crime through every awkward phase and heartbreak and triumph. She knew me better than anyone, sometimes better than I knew myself. We met for lunch on a cold January afternoon, about 3 weeks before Valentine's Day, at a little Italian place near my office. She was stirring her espresso with unusual intensity, and I knew something was bothering her. She asked me how things were with Daniel, and the way she asked it made my stomach tighten, not the casual way friends check in on each other's marriages, but something sharper, more deliberate. I told her things were fine, that we were both busy with work, that we were planning something special for Valentine's Day. She nodded slowly, still stirring that espresso, and then she looked up at me with eyes full of something I could not quite name. She told me she had seen him, Daniel, at a bar in Soho the previous Tuesday night. He was not alone. My first instinct was to defend him. Of course he was not alone, I said. He had client dinners all the time. Drinks with colleagues were part of the job. Sophie shook her head, and I watched her choose her next words carefully, like she was diffusing a bomb. She said this did not look like a client dinner. She said the woman with him was young, pretty, and they were sitting very close together. She said Daniel was smiling at this woman the way he used to smile at me. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I forced a laugh. Sophie was being dramatic, I told her. She was always looking for intrigue where there was none. Daniel loved me. We were happy. There had to be an explanation. Sophie reached across the table and took my hand. She told me she hoped she was wrong. She told me she was probably overreacting. But she also told me to pay attention, really pay attention, over the next few weeks. She made me promise. I broke that promise almost immediately. When I got home that night, Daniel was already there, cooking dinner and singing along to the radio. He kissed me on the forehead and asked about my day, and I looked into his familiar face and saw only the man I loved. Sophie had to be mistaken. Maybe it was a colleague he was mentoring. Maybe it was a client's daughter he was advising on investments. There were 1,000 innocent explanations, and I grabbed onto all of them because the alternative was unthinkable. But the seed had been planted, and seeds have a way of growing whether you tend them or not. Over the next 2 weeks, I started noticing things I had trained myself to ignore. The way Daniel angled his phone away from me when he was texting. The extra care he took with his appearance on days he said he had important meetings. The new cologne that appeared on his dresser, one I had never smelled before and certainly had not bought for him. He started going to the gym earlier in the mornings and coming home later in the evenings. His excuses were always reasonable, always delivered with the same easy smile, but something had shifted in the atmosphere between us. I could feel it even if I could not name it. I started testing him in small ways. I would ask specific questions about his day and watch for inconsistencies. I would suggest meeting him for lunch at his office and note his immediate excuses. I would call him during his supposed gym sessions and count the rings before he picked up, listening for background noise that did not match the story he told. Each test was inconclusive on its own, but together they formed a pattern that I could no longer ignore. My husband was hiding something. The night before I discovered the truth, I made a decision. I decided to plan the most spectacular Valentine's Day surprise of our marriage. I told myself that if I could just remind him how good we were together, if I could reignite whatever spark had dimmed, everything would be fine. I was fighting for my marriage, even though I did not fully understand what I was fighting against. I spent hours researching the perfect gifts, the perfect dinner, the perfect weekend getaway. I found the vintage watch online, an original from the 1950s that cost nearly 3 months of my salary. I did not care. Money meant nothing compared to saving us. I spent that evening while Daniel was at yet another late meeting wrapping the watch in beautiful paper, writing a love letter that poured out every feeling in my heart, booking a surprise trip to the Lake District for the long weekend. I was going to give him everything, remind him of everything. Prove to both of us that our love was worth fighting for. I had never felt so hopeful and so terrified at the same time. That night, Daniel came home around 10, apologizing for the late hour and claiming an investor dinner had run long. He kissed me distractedly and went straight to the shower, and I told myself not to read anything into it. Afterward, he scrolled through his phone for a while before we went to bed. I pretended to be asleep but watched him through half-closed eyes. His face was illuminated by the screen, and that smile was back. Soft, secret, happy in a way that had nothing to do with me. I barely slept that night. The next morning, the 12th of February, Daniel left for work earlier than usual, muttering something about a breakfast meeting. I waited until I heard his car pull away, and then I did something I had never done before in our entire relationship. I logged into his email. I knew his password because he had given it to me years ago, back when we were engaged and he needed me to check something while he was traveling for work. He had never asked me to forget it, and I had never used it without his permission. Until that morning. My hands were shaking as I typed the letters, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I would find nothing and feel guilty about doubting him. I told myself this was the last step before I could let go of Sophie's concerns and focus on our Valentine's Day celebration. I found something, buried in his deleted folder, because Daniel was clearly not as clever as he thought he was. I found a chain of emails between him and someone named Olivia Crane. The first one was dated 3 months earlier. The subject line was simply a heart emoji. I clicked on it with trembling fingers, and my world collapsed around me. The emails were love letters. There was no other way to describe them. Olivia wrote about missing him, about counting the hours until they could be together again, about how he made her feel alive in ways she had never experienced. Daniel responded with words I recognized, words he had once used with me. He called her his soulmate. He told her she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He said their love was worth any risk, any sacrifice. He promised her a future. I scrolled through message after message, my vision blurring with tears. I did not even realize I was crying. I learned that Olivia was a junior analyst at his firm, that they had started flirting during a work trip to Edinburgh, that their affair had been going on for nearly 5 months. 5 months. While I was planning our future, he was building a secret life with someone else. While I was cooking his dinner and washing his clothes and falling asleep in his arms, he was falling in love with her. But the email that truly broke me, the one that turned my devastation into something harder and colder, was dated just the day before. In it, Daniel and Olivia were planning their Valentine's Day, not a quiet affair hidden in hotel rooms. No. They were planning to spend Valentine's Day together publicly for the first time. She was going to tell her friends and family about him. He was going to book them a romantic weekend in Cornwall. He told her that by the end of February he would have told me everything. He was going to leave me. For her. I sat at that computer for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 30 minutes. The tears eventually stopped, replaced by a numbness that spread through my entire body. I read and reread those emails until I had memorized every word, and somewhere in that process something inside me shifted. The woman who had been planning a Valentine's surprise was gone. In her place was someone I did not recognize, someone with a clarity of purpose that cut through the devastation like a blade. Daniel was not just cheating on me, he was planning to leave me. He was making promises to another woman while still wearing his wedding ring. He was going to blindside me, humiliate me, destroy everything we had built together. And he thought I did not know. He thought I was oblivious, trusting, naive. He thought he was in control. He was wrong. I dried my eyes, closed the laptop, and made myself a cup of tea. I sat in our kitchen, the kitchen we had renovated together, and I began to plan. Not a romantic surprise anymore. Something else entirely. I did not know what it would look like yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Daniel was not going to get away with this. He was not going to ride off into the sunset with his mistress while I was left picking up the pieces of our shattered life. If he wanted to burn down our marriage, he was going to feel those flames himself. The first thing I did was create a new email address that Daniel would never know about. I forwarded every single one of those incriminating messages to myself, screenshots and all. Evidence. I needed evidence. I also forwarded them to Sophie with a brief message that simply said, "You were right." I knew she would understand. I knew she would be there when I needed her, but not yet. For now, I needed to think. Over the next 48 hours, I became an actress in my own life. I greeted Daniel with the same smile I always had. I asked about his day with the same interest. I kissed him goodnight and lay beside him in our bed, feeling his warmth against my back while knowing that warmth meant nothing. He was texting Olivia behind my back, probably from the bathroom or during his commute. He was making plans with her while I pretended not to notice. And all the while, I was watching, learning, gathering. Valentine's Day arrived on a cold, gray Thursday. Daniel left for work with a quick kiss and a promise to be home early. He told me he had made dinner reservations at a nice restaurant, just the two of us. He had actually made the reservations, I discovered later, as a cover story while he spent the afternoon with Olivia before coming home to perform the role of devoted husband. The audacity of it still takes my breath away. He was going to spend Valentine's Day with his mistress and then come home to me, probably smelling of her perfume, and pretend everything was normal. But I had my own plans. Instead of waiting at home like a good wife, I called in sick to work and spent the morning making phone calls. The first was to a solicitor, a woman named Patricia Chen, who came highly recommended for handling complex divorce cases. I explained my situation briefly, omitting the emotional details and focusing on the facts. husband having an affair, evidence of plans to leave, need to protect myself financially. Patricia listened without judgment and scheduled an emergency consultation for the following week. She told me to gather financial documents in the meantime, bank statements, investment accounts, property records, anything that would give us a clear picture of our marital assets. I promised I would. The second call was to my mother. This was harder. My parents had adored Daniel from the moment they met him. My father had walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes, so happy that I had found someone who would take care of me. My mother had told me at my wedding that I was the luckiest woman in the world. I did not want to shatter their image of him, but I needed support. I needed someone in my corner. So I told my mother everything, sitting in my parked car outside a coffee shop in Balham, crying so hard I could barely breathe. She listened, and then she said something I will never forget. She said, "Sweetheart, you are stronger than you know, and sometimes being strong means making the people who hurt you face consequences." The third call was to Sophie. She picked up on the first ring, already knowing something was wrong. I had sent her those emails after all. She wanted to come over immediately, to hold me while I cried, to plot revenge over bottles of wine. But I told her not yet. I told her I needed to do this carefully, strategically, without letting Daniel know anything was wrong. She understood, because Sophie always understood. She asked me what I needed from her, and I told her to keep her eyes open. She worked in human resources at a large corporation and had connections everywhere. If there was anything to find about Olivia Crane, I wanted to know. That afternoon, while Daniel was presumably spending Valentine's Day with his mistress, I went through our home office with surgical precision. I photographed every financial document I could find, bank statements showing joint accounts and the personal account Daniel thought I did not know about, investment portfolios that detailed our savings, the mortgage documents for our house, his bonus statements from work, credit card bills that showed purchases I had never seen, jewelry and hotel rooms and restaurant meals that were not for me. Each photograph was another piece of evidence, another brick in the wall I was building between my old life and whatever came next. I also found something unexpected. Hidden in the back of his desk drawer, beneath old tax returns and warranty certificates, was a burner phone. One of those cheap prepaid mobiles you buy at corner shops, the kind you buy when you do not want your calls traced. My hands shook as I turned it on, knowing already what I would find. Text messages, dozens of them, going back months, explicit messages, plans and promises and declarations of love. Some of them were so intimate, so specific about their physical relationship that I had to put the phone down and take deep breaths to keep from being sick. But I did not destroy the phone. I did not confront Daniel. I photographed every message, forwarded the evidence to my new secure email, and put the phone back exactly where I found it. He would have no idea I knew. Not until I was ready. Daniel came home that evening with flowers and chocolate, playing the role of romantic husband with infuriating perfection. We went to dinner at the restaurant he had booked, and he held my hand across the table and told me how much I meant to him. I smiled and nodded and said all the right things while inside I felt nothing but cold, calculated patience. He gave me a beautiful necklace, probably purchased with money he should have been saving for our future. I thanked him and pretended to be moved, and then we went home and I gave him the vintage watch. You should have seen his face. The confusion, quickly masked by a convincing smile. The guilt that flickered in his eyes for just a moment before he buried it. He knew how much thought I had put into that gift. He knew what it represented, and he accepted it anyway, thanking me with a kiss that tasted like ashes on my lips. He wore that watch to work the next day, the watch I had spent months finding for him, and I am certain he thought about Olivia every time he looked at it. The week after Valentine's Day was a masterclass in deception, both his and mine. Daniel continued his routine, texting Olivia from the bathroom, working late for meetings that did not exist, smiling at me with a face that meant nothing. I continued mine, gathering evidence, consulting with my solicitor, preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming. Patricia Chen had reviewed the financial documents and confirmed what I suspected. Our assets were significant, and in the event of a divorce, I would be entitled to half. But more importantly, she told me about something called a post-nuptial agreement. If I could get Daniel to sign one before he left me, I might be able to protect more than just half. It was Sophie who gave me the final piece of the puzzle. She called me one evening, breathless with excitement and fury in equal measure. She had found something about Olivia Crane. It turned out, Olivia was not just any junior analyst at Daniel's firm. She was the daughter of Richard Crane, one of the senior partners. The same senior partner who was deciding whether Daniel would get his promotion. The same senior partner who had no idea his precious daughter was sleeping with a married colleague. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Daniel was not just having an affair. He was having an affair with the boss's daughter. Whether he had pursued Olivia for love or for career advancement was almost irrelevant. Either way, he had made himself incredibly vulnerable. If Richard Crane found out what was happening, Daniel's career would be over. Not just his promotion, his entire future at the firm. Possibly in the entire industry, given how connected these financial circles were. This was not just personal anymore. This was leverage. I spent several days thinking about how to use this information. Part of me wanted to march into Richard Crane's office and tell him everything, watching Daniel's carefully constructed life crumble in real time. But that felt too simple, too quick. Daniel had spent months deceiving me. He deserved more than a quick reckoning. He deserved to feel what I had felt. That slow, creeping realization that everything you believed was a lie. Sophie and I met for coffee that weekend, and together we began to formulate a plan. She had done more digging into Olivia and discovered something interesting. Olivia had a reputation at the firm for being ambitious to the point of ruthlessness. She had allegedly sabotaged colleagues to get ahead, though nothing had ever been proven. More importantly, Olivia had a fiancé, a man named Marcus Webb, who worked in tech and had no idea his future wife was sleeping with a married colleague. Daniel was not just a love affair for Olivia, he was a stepping stone, and when she was done with him, she would move on to the next opportunity without a second glance. This information changed my approach. I had been thinking of Olivia as a villain, the other woman who had stolen my husband, but she was not that simple. She was opportunistic, yes. She was complicit in the destruction of my marriage, absolutely. But she was also being used. Just like me. Daniel had painted himself as a man in an unhappy marriage, someone looking for a way out. He had made promises he probably never intended to keep. And when everything fell apart, he would try to walk away clean, leaving both of us in the wreckage. I decided that when the truth came out, everyone would face consequences. Not just Daniel. Everyone. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I had to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage while secretly dismantling it piece by piece. I met with Patricia Chen regularly, discussing strategy and options. I contacted a private investigator, a quiet man named George who specialized in marital cases, and hired him to document Daniel's movements. I needed more than emails and text messages. I needed photographs, time-stamped evidence, proof that would hold up in court if necessary. George was worth every penny. Within 2 weeks, he had provided me with a dossier of evidence. Photographs of Daniel and Olivia entering and leaving a hotel in Mayfair. Receipts from romantic restaurants and lingerie shops. A video, discreetly taken, of them kissing in his car, in an underground parking garage. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Daniel had no idea he was being watched, and that made all of it beautifully admissible. Meanwhile, Daniel was growing bolder. He and Olivia had apparently decided to accelerate their timeline. I discovered through his emails that they were planning to reveal their relationship by the end of March. Olivia wanted to tell her father. Daniel wanted to ask me for a divorce. They were discussing moving in together, maybe somewhere in Notting Hill where they could start fresh. They were building their future on the ruins of mine, but I was building something too. Patricia Chen helped me draft a post-nuptial agreement that was elegant in its simplicity. If Daniel agreed to it, which he would have to do without knowing my true intentions, he would essentially forfeit his right to half of several key assets in the event of infidelity. The agreement was framed as a mutual protection, something that applied to both of us equally. I just needed to find a way to get him to sign it. The opportunity came from Daniel himself. One evening in early March, he sat me down with an unusually serious expression and told me he had been thinking about our future. He said he wanted us to have children soon and that before we did, maybe we should consider some financial planning, some protections for both of us. He was laying the groundwork for his eventual departure, trying to secure his position before he blindsided me with divorce papers. He had no idea he was walking into my trap. I agreed enthusiastically. I told him I had been thinking the same thing, actually, and that I had already spoken to a solicitor about options. His eyes flickered with surprise, then relief. He thought I was being proactive about our fictional future together. He did not realize I was securing my real one. I showed him the post-nuptial agreement Patricia had drafted, framing it as something we would both sign, something that would protect us both equally in any unforeseen circumstances. The language was dense, full of legal terminology that his eyes glazed over as he skimmed it. He asked a few questions, which I answered smoothly, and then he signed on the dotted line. He signed his own future away without even realizing it. After that, things moved quickly. I contacted Richard Crane's assistant and scheduled a meeting for the following week. Claiming to be a consultant with important information about a personnel matter, I prepared a folder containing all of the evidence, the emails, the photographs, the investigator's report. I wrote a letter explaining everything in calm, factual terms. I was not going to confront Daniel privately and give him a chance to spin the narrative. I was going to expose him publicly, professionally, and devastatingly. Sophie insisted on coming with me to the meeting. She took the day off work and sat beside me in Richard Crane's imposing corner office as I handed over the folder and watched his face transform from polite confusion to horrified realization. I explained that I was Daniel Whitfield's wife. I explained that his daughter had been having an affair with my husband for 6 months. I provided the evidence, document by document, photograph by photograph. I was calm throughout, almost clinical because I had cried all my tears already. This was not about emotion anymore. This was about justice. Richard Crane was a formidable man in his 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of corporate manipulation, but this clearly blindsided him. His daughter, his princess, having an affair with a married colleague. A colleague who was up for promotion, who had been cultivating Richard's approval for years. The betrayal was layered and complex, and I watched him process each level with increasing fury. He thanked me for bringing this to his attention. He apologized, genuinely apologized, for what I had been put through, and then he asked me what I wanted to happen next. I told him I wanted the truth to have consequences. I told him I was filing for divorce and that I had secured a post-nuptial agreement that would protect my interests. I told him I was not asking him to fire Daniel because that was not my decision to make, but I wanted him to know who Daniel really was. A liar, a manipulator, a man who would sleep with the boss's daughter to advance his career. What Richard did with that information was up to him. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in months, not happy, exactly, but something close to powerful. I had taken control of a situation that had been designed to destroy me. I had refused to be a victim, and whatever happened next, I knew I could face it. What happened next exceeded my expectations. Richard Crane, it turned out, was not a man who tolerated betrayal in any form. Within 48 hours, Daniel was called into a meeting with HR and informed that his position at the firm had become untenable. He was not technically fired, because that would expose the company to liability, but he was given the option to resign quietly or face an investigation into inappropriate workplace conduct. He resigned. His promotion, the one he had been working toward for years, evaporated. His reputation in the industry, built on networking and relationships, crumbled as whispers spread about why he had really left. But that was just the professional consequence. The personal ones were even more satisfying. Richard Crane confronted Olivia about the affair, and I was told later that it was ugly. She tried to spin it as true love, as something worth fighting for. But her father was not interested in romance. He saw it for what it was. His daughter sleeping with a married man who was using her for career advancement. He cut off her access to the family money, that trust fund she had been living on. He told her she was a disappointment, and that he would not be helping her recover from this disaster. Olivia, faced with the sudden absence of both her wealthy father's support and her career prospects, turned on Daniel with the ferocity of a cornered animal. The love affair that they had both been so certain about collapsed almost instantly. She blamed him for ruining her life. He blamed her for being too connected to her father. They screamed at each other in public, apparently, at a restaurant in Soho where mutual friends witnessed the whole thing. The great romance was revealed for what it really was. Two selfish people using each other, each expecting the other to provide something they never actually had. And then there was Marcus, Olivia's fiancé, the man she had been planning to marry while sleeping with my husband. He found out about the affair not from me, but from the office gossip that spread like wildfire after Daniel's resignation. He showed up at the flat Olivia was renting, apparently, and the confrontation was brutal. He called off the engagement, demanded back the heirloom ring his grandmother had given him, and left Olivia completely alone for the first time in her carefully curated life. I should have felt guilty about the collateral damage. Marcus was innocent in all of this. Richard Crane was just a father who trusted his daughter. But I had spent months being innocent myself, and look where it had gotten me. Sometimes the truth destroys things that were already built on lies. That is not my fault. That is just consequences. As for Daniel, he finally came home to face me on a cold evening in mid-March. I was sitting in the living room. the divorce papers already drafted and waiting on the coffee table. He walked in looking 10 years older than he had a week before, haggard, defeated, furious. He demanded to know what I had done. He accused me of ruining his life, of destroying his career, of being vindictive and cruel. I let him rage for several minutes, watching his face contort with anger that he had absolutely no right to feel. And then, when he had exhausted himself, I spoke. I told him that I had done nothing except tell the truth. I had shared evidence of his affair with his employer. I had filed for divorce based on his infidelity. I had exercised my rights under the post-nuptial agreement that he himself had signed. Every consequence he was facing was a direct result of his own choices. I had not created this situation, I had simply refused to be destroyed by it. He tried to argue. He tried to explain. He claimed that things with Olivia had just happened, that he had never meant to hurt me, that if I had just been more attentive or understanding or whatever excuse he had prepared, none of this would have happened. I listened to every word with the same clinical detachment I had maintained throughout this process, and then I told him to leave. He stared at me like he did not recognize me, and honestly, I did not recognize myself either. The woman who had been planning Valentine's Day surprises was gone. In her place was someone harder, stronger, someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side carrying her own salvation. Daniel left that night. He stayed with a friend for a few weeks, then found a cramped flat in Brixton that was nothing like the life he had been planning. The divorce proceedings moved forward smoothly, thanks to Patricia Chen's expertise and the ironclad evidence I'd gathered. The post-nuptial agreement held up perfectly. Daniel's lawyers tried to challenge it, but he had signed it willingly, without coercion, and there was nothing they could do. I kept the house. I kept most of our savings. I kept my dignity. The final divorce decree came through in September, almost exactly a year after Daniel and Olivia had started their affair. I signed the papers with a steady hand and felt nothing but relief. The marriage was officially over. The man I had loved was officially a stranger, and I was officially free. But the story does not end there, because karma, as it turns out, was not finished with Daniel yet. Without his income from the firm and without the promotion that would have set him up for life, Daniel struggled financially. He tried to find work in other companies, but the whispers followed him. People knew why he had left. People knew about the affair with the boss's daughter. No one wanted to touch him. He went from being a rising star to being unemployable in his industry within the span of 6 months. He also faced consequences in his personal life. His father, who had always been distant, essentially cut him off after learning the full story. His friends, many of whom had been mutual friends with me, quietly distanced themselves. He found himself isolated, alone, living in a flat he could barely afford, with no prospects and no future. As for Olivia, she fared little better. Her father eventually forgave her enough to restore some of her trust fund access, but the relationship was never the same. She left London entirely, moving to New York for a fresh start. I heard through the grapevine that she struggled there too, that her reputation had followed her somehow, that the ambitious career she had been building was derailed by the scandal. I wish I could say I took no pleasure in their suffering. I wish I could claim moral high ground and insist that I was motivated purely by justice, not revenge. But the truth is more complicated. There were moments, especially in the early days after the truth came out, when I felt a deep primal satisfaction at watching them face consequences. They had tried to build happiness on my destruction, and instead they had destroyed themselves. That felt right. That felt like karma. But satisfaction faded. After a while, I stopped thinking about Daniel and Olivia entirely. They became irrelevant. Background noise in a life I was actively rebuilding. I threw myself into my work and earned another promotion within the year. I started therapy to process everything that had happened and to understand the patterns that had led me to miss so many red flags. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected during my marriage. I learned to be alone without being lonely. Sophie remained my rock throughout all of it. She was there for every late-night phone call, every crying session, every moment of doubt and fear. She reminded me constantly that I was stronger than I knew, that I had survived something that would have broken many people, and that I deserved to be happy again. I am not sure I believed her at first, but over time, her words sank in. It has been 2 years now since the divorce was finalized. I still live in the house that Daniel and I bought together, but I have renovated it completely. New paint, new furniture, new everything. The only thing left from my marriage is the vintage watch, which I still have somewhere in a drawer. I thought about selling it or throwing it away, but somehow I could not. It represents something to me now, not Daniel, not the betrayal, but the moment I decided to stop being a victim and start being a survivor. I have started dating again, cautiously. There was a man I met at a friend's dinner party, a teacher named James who makes me laugh and never looks at his phone when we are together. It is early days, and I am not rushing anything. Trust is harder for me now, and that is something I am still working through. But I am open to love again. I am open to the possibility of a future with someone who actually deserves me. Looking back on everything that happened, I sometimes wonder if I would do it differently. Should I have confronted Daniel privately first? Should I have given him a chance to explain before I went to his employer? Should I have been more forgiving, more understanding, more willing to work through our problems together? No. The answer is no. Daniel did not make a mistake that could be forgiven. He made a series of deliberate choices over many months, each one designed to deceive me while he built a life with someone else. He looked me in the eye every single day and lied. He made promises he never intended to keep. He was planning to blindside me with divorce while I was planning Valentine's Day surprises. There is no forgiving that. There is no working through it. There is only accepting the truth and protecting yourself from further harm. The revenge I took was not about hurting Daniel for the sake of hurting him. It was about refusing to be invisible. It was about demanding that the truth be told and that consequences be felt. It was about reclaiming power in a situation where I had been made powerless. Some people might call that vindictive. I call it justice. If you are watching this and recognizing something in my story, if you are wondering whether the person you love is hiding something, if you are making excuses for behavior that does not quite add up, I want you to know something. Trust your instincts. Pay attention to the gaps. Do not be afraid to look for the truth, even if finding it will hurt. Because the pain of knowing is nothing compared to the pain of being blindsided by someone who was supposed to love you. And if you discover that you have been betrayed, know that you have options. You do not have to stay silent. You do not have to protect the person who hurt you. You can be strategic. You can be strong. You can walk through the fire and come out the other side carrying your own salvation. Daniel thought he was in control of our story. He thought he could write the ending however he wanted, casting me as the oblivious wife who never saw it coming. But he was wrong. I saw it coming, and when it arrived, I was ready. The ending I wrote for myself is not about bitterness or hatred. It is about freedom. It is about standing in the ruins of what I thought my life would be and choosing to build something better. It is about looking in the mirror and seeing someone who refused to be destroyed. I was planning a Valentine's Day surprise, and they were planning to cheat. But in the end, the only person who was truly surprised was Daniel. Because he never saw me coming. And that, more than anything, is the revenge that keeps me warm at night. I am Emma. I was betrayed by the man I loved, and I survived. Not just survived, I won. The end of my marriage was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that I am writing for myself, on my own terms, with my own strength. And if there is one thing I have learned through all of this, it is that the best revenge is not destruction. It is transformation. It is becoming someone so powerful, so grounded, so completely in control of your own narrative that the people who tried to break you cannot even touch you anymore. Daniel is a ghost from a past life now. Olivia is a footnote in someone else's story. And I am here, alive, thriving, ready for whatever comes next. That is not revenge. That is karma. That is justice. That is the truth finally coming into the light. And the light, as it turns out, is exactly where I was meant to be all along.